Hey folks, I'm Blake Flannery. I'm one of the primary cadre with Orion Training Group and the CEO of Maneuver Training Solutions. And what I'm going to talk about today with y'all is white light kit selection. So what is it that I look for when I'm procuring a white lights, and specifically to the different tasks that I might be using them for. So we're going to go through those. Again, these are considerations. Take it or leave it. I'm not going to tell you the hard and fast of what is the very best thing to use, because that will be based on your preferences. And sometimes your preference is just a brand loyalty thing. So covering the considerations, and we'll have a good conversation looking at some kit. All right, so to start it off, let's actually talk about what I like to look for when I'm looking at white lights. And to break that out, there's two categories that you're gonna see labeled, or features labeled for a light. And that's gonna be the lumens and the candela. To break it down, super simple, your lumens is your brightness. Think of it almost like, for those shooters out there, like your muzzle velocity, right? That's how much power you're getting out of that light for total brightness. And I always go for what is the brightest I can get out of that light. Depending on some of the other features and the maker, you are gonna get more or less. Some people focus more on high lumens and not as high candela. And some makers focus really high on candela, and sometimes you can get both. But understanding what each one is going to give you can influence your decision of which way you go. So definitely want high lumens, always like high lumens for handheld lights and really everything. Anywhere around 1,000, whether it's going to be a little bit above or a little bit under, is going to put you really good. Now, if you're lower than that, so say about 350 lumens, depending on your use, that's still very adequate, right? And we'll talk more about use cases for them. So there's lumens, that's your intensity, your brightness, equating that to muzzle velocity. Then you have candela, and that is the measurement of that center intensity of that beam, which is the throw of the light, or think of it as your range. The higher candela, the further that light is going to push and give you more range out of that light. Whether or not you need that for your uses is going to influence whether or not you go for the super high candela, or if you're okay with a lower candela but still those high lumens. All right, so those are two things that I look at when it comes to an everyday carry light. I definitely want high lumens, and I like something that also gives me high candela. Now, some considerations with that is, what are you likely to be using, an everyday carry light for? And it's probably going to be looking at things close in front of you. You drop something in your vehicle, or right outside as you're getting out of your vehicle. Your kids drop something in the movie theater and you're trying to find it. So a super high lumen, super high candela light right there, a couple feet in front of your face, can be a little much, but because it gives me a lot across a variety of situations, and then it just comes down to understanding what I have. So instead of pointing that super bright spot right in front of me, if I angle the light away and get some of that peripheral illumination, then I accomplish the task. So I prioritize typically lumens over candela, because most of my experience is using white light in close quarters, inside of enclosed rooms. I'm not trying to push that light super far. However, my background and my use case is as a Force Reconnaissance Marine, and we would really only use white light once we're inside a structure and searching in a structure, or administrative, we're in a safe area where we can afford to have low light discipline by shining white lights. If your use case is going to be more out in the open, you live on a lot of property, you have a farm and you've got to deal with 4-legged predators as well as the 2-legged kind, then you probably want to prioritize that higher candela to let that light push out, right? The other thing I look for too, and you see with this one, I've got larger hands, so this fills my hand really well. I don't like smaller, shorter lights because they sit inside my hand. I like something that is proud to my hand, it fills it well enough, and then if need be, this could be something that I can strike somebody with. So that is one of my go-tos when it comes to a handheld light for everyday carry. Now for more practical use, we'll say, I do prefer a shorter, smaller light because this is more of a tertiary thing. I have other lights when I'm working that are primarily going to be used, and this is like a backup to those. So a smaller light is more preferred that I'm going to carry on my kit. What I also like to have on handheld lights kind of depends on the construction, or we'll call it a finger retention device. So this is made by Theorem. They make them for a lot of different lights, so you can check them out. But you can also DIY this yourself with just a little bit of elastic shock cord. I've even seen people use like oversized key rings and some 550 cord to do it. So don't get too wrapped up in that. If you want that, you can set it up. But those are things I'm looking for with those handhelds. Again, high lumens, high candela is nice, but for me, I don't prioritize that as much as having the high lumen. And if you can get both, then that's going to be gravy for you, all right? When it comes to the lights I start putting on kit, so I've got a light on the rifle, a light on the pistol, and I have a light on the helmet. So we'll talk about each of those. Starting with the rifle, I want the high lumens, and this is where I start looking at wanting higher candela. Something that a lot of people would say when I was starting out was that you don't want a super bright light because it will blind you. It'll illuminate the whole room and you're gonna be blinded by your own white light. I don't know exactly where that idea came from, because I have used and continue to use lights that are up to and a little bit over 1,000 lumens inside rooms, and I've never been blinded standing in a room. However, if you've ever trained for CQB and you're in a shoot house and you've got paper targets, a lot of those paper targets have a little bit of reflectivity to them. And when you put a super bright, brilliant white light on the target, and especially if you point your beam at where you're trying to ID the weapon of that target, that hot spot can actually white out that spot on the paper. Because it's so brilliant and because you're looking at a two-dimensional object, the sheet of paper, it's hard to pick out the detail at the speed you're looking to do so. Now, some of that comes into your use and being smart about how you use the lights, but it's also a bit of a just rangeism and trainingism thing. So you can go super bright, you're not gonna blind yourself. Where that did come into play, we talked about with the selection, is if I'm gonna use that super bright handheld light to look at something that's right in front of my face, I'm going to start obscuring what that object is. But again, it comes down to understanding what you have, what it's capable of, and do you need to point the brightest spot of that light directly at what it is you're trying to see. The other things I look for in the light that I'm gonna put on the rifle is, with the mounting solutions, is I want to get it as tight as I can to the rail, to the body of that weapon. The further out it sticks, the more likely it's gonna be able to snag on something. So I wanna get it as tight as possible. And then if you're in the business or the hobby, whatever, of having to use lasers, I want to also put it as close as I can to the laser. One, to snug everything up, right, as nice and tight as I possibly can, but it's also gonna keep things more consistent when I'm working around a barricade. Now, this particular laser emits right out over the top of the barrel. Most other lasers, you're getting your emission out of one side or the other. So if my light is tucked up close to where that laser emits, then it's a very similar process. Whether I'm working on the right or left side of the barricade, I know I need to push just so far around. Not only am I clearing the barrel, but I'm clearing the things that are going to allow me to actually get that point of aim and engage that target. So that's why typically when you see my guns, it's always mounted on the right side, because most lasers are emitting from the right side of the body, with the exception, of course, of the Raid we talked about, and then there's a couple others out there. For tail caps, I prefer a multi-function tail cap. So if my remote switch doesn't work for me, I can go over to the manual switch on the tail cap itself to still project that light if I need it. So that's something that I look for in overall most lights that you're gonna have out there. The big name brands, there'll be that modularity, so you can put one company's tail cap on another company's body with a third company's head and then a fourth company's light mount, right? So you can really Frankenstein the whole thing to get it to the way that you want. But that's generally what I'm looking for and how I'm looking to set that up. Pistol lights are really basic. There's not a whole lot to it. They just go on to the bottom of the pistol and you're pretty much good. I'm not really ever concerned about the light being presented beyond the muzzle. One thing that can be helpful with that, and that goes for your placement on the rifle as well, is the more protected your bezel is from the muzzle, the less carbon fouling you're gonna get on the glass. Now that's fairly easy to clean, especially if you stay on top of it. But if it's further forward, it's more protected, so it's gonna happen less. There's less cleaning and work you gotta do with it. The only thing you really need to consider with when you're selecting that pistol light is holster availability. Now, companies like Modlite and Surefire are really big names. They've been out there for a long time, so you're gonna easily find holsters. Streamlight, you're easily gonna find holsters. If you have a pretty common pistol, like a Glock, with a common popular light brand, it's gonna be pretty easy to find a holster that's compatible. For me, it's somewhere between a backup and another tool. So if something happens and I go to pull the trigger on the rifle and I'm in close quarters and it doesn't fire, I'm immediately switching to this. However, I never had to do that because I maintained the rifle and I proactively reloaded it so that I'm not running the magazine dry. So it was never actually necessary for me to have the pistol on me, but I always still carried it because it's one of those what ifs and being prepared for that. Now there were times where I intentionally transitioned to the pistol to work in more confined space, such as being shipboard and clearing a vessel. A lot of times it could be easier to go to the pistol and fit through some of those confined spaces. Pistol light selection is pretty basic. It's still want something super bright. I want enough candela that I'm gonna get the throw that I need, which if I work in close quarters, I don't need that much. If you often employ something like this, so if you're law enforcement, this is your primary firearm, you're working outside, that's where you're gonna want that higher candela to be able to push that light when you've got this blaster out. One note, really quick, when it comes to concealed carry, okay? If I'm carrying concealed, you don't technically need a pistol light to carry concealed, because I should not be drawing the pistol and presenting it unless I've already identified there is a threat, which means if I have identified a threat, I have enough illumination within the environment to do so, which means I have enough illumination to gain sights and engage. However, There may be a situation where you believe that threat is present and real and you draw, but if there's just a small question of doubt and you didn't have enough illumination to be 100% certain, either you end up using a level of force that was unnecessary, or you hesitate and now you become the one in the chalk line. So although you don't technically need to have a light on your pistol for concealed carry, I have one on mine, and I highly recommend that you also have one on yours. But if you're concealed carrying, that's also very close quarters engagement. So do you need super high candela, or are you okay with just high lumens and moderate candela? And of course, if you can find both for a price point you're comfortable with, rock on, right? Easy day. So now the last one we'll talk about is going to be, right, the one that I put on the bucket. I have it on this articulating mount so that I can provide the type of lighting that I need, whether I need to project it directly in front of me, if I need to project it at the ceiling and umbrella light down and around, or I can push it down. So if I'm somewhere where I don't have that overhead cover, such as maybe briefing around vehicles, I can push it down and it still then reflects off the surfaces and provides enough ambient illumination, and I can talk to people without shining a light in their face. Those are the things that I look for, my selection. And then again, with that helmet mounted light, there's a handful of different ways you can do it. You can just straight up pick a tinny and put it on there, but then you're stuck with just directly forward. There are some mounts that will attach via Velcro, so you can change the orientation that way. I prefer an articulating mount so that I can just point it whatever direction I want very quickly. All right, so now I want to talk about a little bit about my specific methods for activation and how I run the lights. So really quick, starting with the helmet mounted light, I will reach up and remove the cap and then activate it. And then as soon as I'm done and I close it, I put the cap back on like you just saw me do, right? So I'm always placing that cap back on because it's right there and it's easy to do. If I have one of those on the rifle, I would take the cap off before going into whatever our actions on target are gonna be. And then I would place it back on once all of that is done. We'll talk about that more in a sec. Handheld lights are pretty simple. I generally prefer to index up here, what we call the neck index, and it's that simple. Sometimes I'll bring it up a little bit higher, just depending on the angle that I need to be presenting that light at. But I don't do anything weird like hold it way out here, the old FBI technique. And as far as incorporating with a pistol, there's multiple methods for that, but that's why these little rings are super handy. All right, but this just gives me a lot of control. It also keeps my hand out in front of me, and so maybe I don't need the level of force that is provided by my carry pistol, but I can project this, and then this can also be used to help protect me or if I need to strike. However, saying that, if you don't know how to fight and throw hands, that's not going to help you, so know how to throw hands. As far as the pistol goes, my preferred method is as I push out, I will click down with my trigger finger, engage, and then as I'm bringing it back, I use my left hand thumb to click it off. All right, and lastly, the rifle. So I prefer to use a lot of remote switches for things. This is a shorter carbine, and so with my longer arms, it's much more comfortable for me to reach up and use my thumb to activate the laser directly. But I still need a good means of activating my white light if I need to go to white light. So on this one, I have the accent button set up behind it, and I have it turned around because it actually puts the button just a little bit closer to this position compared to the, I guess you say, the normal way of mounting it. So the button would be looking at me as I have it mounted. And I have to move it this far back so that I can not only get the battery cap off, but clear the battery out of the housing. If I push it up one more rail slot, I can't get the battery out because it hits the mount. So it has to be this far back, and it is backwards, so it's an easier movement for me to use. I just kind of like the accent switch. There are pros and cons to it, just like everything else. But that's why I have it set up in this fashion, and I know people are probably already in the comments asking, why the hell do you have it set up that way? And that's why, all right? It works for me, and because I'm either one or the other, it's not a huge thing for me to make this switch. And if my hand has to slide back slightly as I do so, it's not a vastly different grip. And that's the biggest thing with how I set all this stuff up, is it should really be one grip that supports everything that I do. There should not be a daytime grip and a laser grip and a white light grip. There's just how you grip the gun, and then being able to adapt to what you need to do, all right? By just really just moving your thumb. By putting my switches on the 12 o'clock of the rail as I'm walking along, I hold it the same way I hold a pistol, so I'm not going to negligently, words are hard, activate this light when I don't want to. All right, so that is how I mitigate it. A lot of people like to blame pressure pads for white light NDs, when in fact, it's the user. When you blame an inanimate object for your failings, we call that cognitive dissonance. All right, Dunning-Kruger says hello. It's important to understand some of these specifications, and you can really nerd out about lumens and candela and all the things that go into the construction of a light and what makes a flashlight beam a flashlight beam. And if you want to go down that rabbit hole, cool. As long as you have a basic understanding, you can make a smart purchase for what you need, and then set it up smartly. And always be open to the idea that you may have set it up poorly or not the most efficient way, and to make an adjustment. And you have all this stuff and you want to train, you're looking for places to train. You can come to places like here at Ben Franklin Range that consistently hold events and classes that you can find so you can train with these devices. And it's really important that you do so to get that training and to work with other like-minded folks. So make sure you get that training in. Obviously, there are a lot of companies out there. I work for Orion Training Group, and also my company, Maneuver Training Solutions. We offer classes specific to using white light and night vision. And whenever we do night vision, we will incorporate the use of white light. But there are a lot of other folks out there that offer these classes, and there's a lot of white light training that's available. But you also don't need to only go to classes or only go to the range. You can practice this stuff in your home. It's called dry fire. And you can practice this stuff with a handheld light. All right, again, it's about understanding the equipment and the use of that light, getting smarter at it, getting better at its use, so you can actually become a dangerous individual. So I'm Blake Flannery, and this has been a video on white light Kitsiderations.